Hello, my name is Helen Moon and welcome to our TCN's webinar series, Meeting of Minds, bringing together the latest industry hot topics with some of the best minds within the business. Today we'll be talking about how to make a success of your digital adoptions and how the role of culture, which is often overlooked, is so critical within this process. You'll be aware that many organisations today are becoming a lot more agile and they're really embracing new innovations to redefine their strategies, become more competitive and create new opportunities for growth. But some organisations are still reticent and even fearful of these new technologies and innovations, and that's what we're here for today. We'll be looking at how to firmly establish your place in today and tomorrow's society, and it's not just about the technical kit that you purchase, but it's also about looking at how to foster the right culture within your organisation. So it's with great pleasure today that I welcome Professor Simeon Yates, Director of Culture and Director of the Institute of Cultural Capital in Liverpool. Welcome, Simeon. Thank you very much for being here today and for sharing your research results with us. So for the next 15 minutes, Simeon will be taking us through his research findings. And I think, Simeon, a great starting point would be if you'd mind introducing yourself to our audience today.
Okay, so I'm Professor of Digital Culture at the University of Liverpool and Director of the Institute of Cultural Capital. And my kind of background is in studying the social impacts of digital technologies, not necessarily the design or the making of them, but the kind of impact they have on people. And I've studied everything from some of the very early studies on email through to more recently I've been looking at a whole variety of different ways in which they're changing our everyday lives.
And so looking at your recent research project, could you explain a little bit more about this and what made you undertake it?
Okay, so we were working with Cisco, and one of the things that's quite interesting in a lot of the research on people uptaking technology, taking it on, is that it's very individual. It's about what they individually want to do, and it's often about domestic technology or your mobile phone. And there's not a great deal of research about how companies and large-scale organisations take on technologies from the perspective of the workers, the people actually ending up using it. So what we wanted to have a look at was the kind of UK workforce and how its attitudes towards technology and what they thought were successful results. So it's a national study across a whole range of sectors and a whole range of different levels of job, about 3,000 workers, and their opinions on what they thought were successful technology implementations.
Fantastic, thank you. And so delving into your findings and looking at technical adoption, what do you think is hindering organisations with regards to technical adoption? Is it age, for example?
Well, one of the things we wanted to have a look at was try and get away from thinking about the problems of being, where's the finance or what are the legacy systems or whatever that are getting in the way, and ask what the organisational or cultural factors. And partly because I believed, and the research shows, that they're far more important than some of the things that people probably first think about. But also because another motivator for the research is so much recent technological innovation has been highly disruptive. And in fact, we've had so many of them that we kind of get used to it. So, text messaging was invented for engineers to pass messages. It wasn't designed for people to do their personal lives, but we're all dependent on it now, and it's kind of transformed communication. Amazon, Uber, iTunes, they're all changing huge parts of how we do things. So if companies aren't good at moving with the change or being innovative themselves or bringing in new technologies, they're going to get left behind. So part of what we wanted to do was point out some of the things one could do to make sure your company stays agile, as it were. And the first thing everyone assumes is bring in lots of millennials. They all know about technology, etc. But strange enough, we found that age is not really the best measure. Confidence at home and with social media doesn't mean you're confident with the Excel spreadsheets at work. So you can't rely on just assuming lots of new members of the workforce are going to be your solution. And in fact, what we did find were things like leadership was important, having a vision is important, communication about your new technology is important, thinking through the stages that your workforce will have to go through to accept technology is also very important, and it needs to be planned and thought through. And the organisations that were doing that, the workers thought whatever the solution was, even if it was just a small new innovation or a major one, was successful. The ones that weren't, the workers didn't think they were successful, therefore their engagement would be much less.
Okay, that's interesting. What about your thoughts on users becoming habitual within the workplace? Does that play a factor?
Well, one of the things about work and work culture is we get used to doing things in certain ways, and doing things in certain ways is part and parcel essentially of what management's about. In social science of culture, there's two sides to culture. There's the practices, there's what we do, and then there's the ideas we have about how the world is and how we put the two together. And in the workplace, we get a situation where, you know, Department X does this in that way and has done for a very long time, and that's that workplace culture, and people are happy in it, know their role and everything. You throw in a disruptive technology, that all goes up in the air, and you will get resistance because you're threatening lots of change and so on. So actually, rather than just thinking about it as a technology rollout, you kind of have to think about it as a culture change in which technology is a part.
Okay.
And you have to think through the stages and the things that people will accept. I mean, that you've got to think the stuff's usable. If they don't think the technology is usable, they won't engage with it. They've got to feel that it's going to be effective as well, that it's going to deliver on their job or whatever role you've given them. You've also got to have a social environment where using it is acceptable.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, there's quite a lot of times you bring in technology innovations, everyone goes, one half of the workforce goes, that's great, the other half doesn't, and then there's conflict over it. You've got to have and lastly, the stuff to facilitate it happening, making sure that the infrastructure's right, etc., is important. But what we found in the research, it was that those more qualitative cultural things, the leadership, the social environment, were far more important to people than the infrastructure type things.
Okay, that's interesting, thank you. So looking at organisations then who are making a really big success of this, as you've just reflected on, can you give us an example of a company that's doing a really great job from a technical adoption point of view?
That's actually quite hard to do because most companies don't tell you anything about whether they're succeeding or not. I'll tell you an anecdote instead. There's a fantastic book, one of my favourite books, called In the Age of the Smart Machine, by an American academic called Shoshana Zuboff. And one of her examples is a pharmaceutical organisation that brought in what we think of as social media. They brought in a text-based conferencing system that flattened hierarchies, was designed to allow the research teams to collaborate more, and it was supported by management. The staff really engaged with it, and it really changed the company culture. It flattened it out. It did lead to more innovation, more cross-company communication. Everybody was very happy with it. But it changed culture in the workplace. People started to talk to each other more in different ways and across different departments. And strangely enough, one of the things they found out was that women were paid a lot less than the men.
Wow.
That became notable through the conversation. And through that, then management became afraid of it.
Right.
So they changed its structure against kind of the culture that had now been created, made it much more traditionally hierarchical. People stopped using it, you know, so that's almost an example of going the other way.
Yeah, so they've moved from a fostering a great culture within the organisation to actually becoming a lot more traditional.
But if you think these days, we have lots of organisations now bringing in social media tools into the workplace, and company culture is different. Hierarchies have flattened over time, and approaches to management have changed. So that bringing in those things is much easier because you can engage that culture. I think what you need to think about then is, you know, in my organisation, what makes sense, and how much culture change can you make happen?
Sure. That makes sense, thank you. Simeon, so a lot of our audience here today will be interested in better understanding what success looks like in terms of technical rollouts. Can you give us a company example that might bring this to life?
Well, actually, giving a company example is quite hard because the truth is most companies don't let you know whether it's going well or badly. Right. So, as an academic wanting to find those cases, it's difficult. In terms of what seems to be the case, looking at the stories that companies tell and what you can find in the press, is that essentially those ones that have taken things like social media use in-house have been quite successful in changing company culture around communications practice, say, and so on. Because by its nature, it requires you to change how you think about communication, how the organisation is structured, and so on. But I'm sure there's plenty of examples of, especially say in engineering or so on, of bringing in new design technologies and 3D printing type solutions that have been very successful in changing the way a company approaches the market and so on.
Thank you. So let's keep on the theme of success. and let's look at evangelists or innovators within an organisation. What advice would you give to them in terms of building up a business case for investment and bringing on board their key stakeholders, for example?
If we're talking about investment in a new technology solution in a company, I think the first thing they've got to accept is no matter how clever the technology is, that the real battle they're going to have is about getting the culture changed. So just telling people this fantastic technology doesn't work. So I think you've got to do a lot of planning. Mm-hmm. You've got to ensure that you have got the company leadership with you. It's almost impossible, I think, and this is separate from the research, to roll out new technologies in an organisation where the senior management are not with you. Absolutely. But I actually think it's more than just them saying, oh, that's a good idea. It's them being part of the decision making in terms of choosing it, in terms of thinking about how it's going to change their organisation, and that means having a digital vision for the organisation. And that came out very strongly in the research, that those organisations where there was a clear digital vision, right, and the workforce knew and could identify and talk about the fact that the leadership had a digital vision, mm-hmm, seemed to be the ones that had the most successful rollouts. So that's the other thing, get your senior management on board. Yeah. But then really spend your time thinking about how you're going to do the communications, and when you roll it out, how you're going to do the communications and the training, and also make sure you're going to change the company culture. So this department's not going to do its job the way, mm-hmm, it used to. The new system's got to align with that. You often get new technology brings change to the organisation, and they're still not quite lined up. And I think another thing is to talk with senior management about how you incentivise people to use it. Okay. And everyone hears that, they think people get paid to use it. But, you know, to use an example from my own experience, we're currently running out a new research management system at the university. One's having to put one's money where one's mouth is in terms of this kind of research, because I've been part of that team. But the incentive there is complex. One is that there is lots more government regulation that we have to document this stuff. Mm-hmm. University processes require us to document this stuff, so the staff have to do it. But at the other end, though, it allows them to gather lots of information about themselves that's useful for promotion, and it presents it in a neat and consistent way, etc. It also helps administrators, so we've got different stakeholders who will get something out of it. Getting them to understand those incentives for using it is important. Otherwise, again, why change? You know, so you have to have that plan, I think. That's all separate from having chosen the right technology or the one that's going to be most effective. You've got to have that plan ready, I think, when you're trying to persuade senior management that it's okay, it's a good idea.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And does that sort of go along the lines of helping to shift that company culture, so fostering that cultural change?
Yeah, and like I said, maybe getting management to understand that what they're doing is changing their company culture, not installing a new account system. Right. Okay. You know, that it is organisational change management, not simply a technical fix, because that is very often the case. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could list the number of new finance systems or student record systems or whatever that I've been through in my career. Most of them just brought in, and you spend 2 and a bit years of argument over it, followed by changes in stuff. Right. Whereas a little bit of planning, and suddenly, you know, and that's money and business and time. Mm-hmm. And in this competitive thing, when things are being disruptive, it could be advantage.
Okay, thank you. That's good. So thank you, Simeon. So in terms of wrapping this up, what would the sort of key takeaways you give to our audience today in terms of really making a success out of new technical rollouts?
Well, so those 4 areas I mentioned about making sure that the technology you choose is perceived to be useful, mm-hmm, and effective, right, by the people who are going to end up using it, because that will ensure kind of engagement with it. And importantly, ensure that the social environment, which is what we've mainly been talking about, is in place. And lastly, to make sure that you have addressed the practical, you know, infrastructure issues. But in that kind of social environment, that's where we go back to things I was just talking about, where you have to make sure you've got that plan for the communications and training, for the good support, for the leadership, for the vision. That provides, as it were, the envelope, the package that the rest is going to work in. And if you miss out any one of those, it doesn't work. But our research implies that of them, that's the most important.
Right.
But I would also say that one of the things that does seem to be more of a and this is me just making a more general comment, is that so much more of work in many organisations now is about making use of shared resources, shared data, shared insights and so on. You know, that there is a sense that the social media sharing world is infiltrating kind of British organisational culture. And I think if some of the things you introduce go against the way things are shifting and changing, there's two dangers. A, staff won't engage. Millennials might not know about how to use the accounting package, but they are comfortable in that world. But secondly, if you look at those businesses, the Ubers and the Airbnb and the others, aspects of how we do business is changing, and that's got to be part of your thinking as well. And that's kind of the culture outside the organisation.
Absolutely. Professor Simeon Yates, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us today and for talking us through how it's not just about the technology and digital software that you purchase, but it's also about fostering the right cultural change within your organisation.
Thank you.
And for our audience today, I'd like to say thank you. We wish you the very best of luck with your today and future technical rollouts.